Create a new notes page. That's on the right side, and that is called Challenges Facing the Success of the Abolition Movement, and then today's date. So the title you're putting on the top of your notes page is what you see in red, and then whatever today's date is. So we are going to speak today, or in this screencast, about the challenges facing the success of the abolition movement. This title, Challenges Facing Abolition, will appear at the top of all the pages throughout this screencast. You do not need to write it down. It is just the title. You already wrote it at the top of your notes page. This is Nat Turner being captured by a farmer after the rebellion that he led. And here are some details about that rebellion or revolt. So Nat Turner's revolt was in 1831. It was in Virginia. And for the most part, he and his followers indiscriminately killed 55 to 65 white people. And he believed he was being inspired by God to do the act that he did. And there were various responses to this throughout the country, which we'll talk about. This is another image from the time of the rebellion happening. So, responses to Turner's rebellion. So the anti-slavery response. These are people in favor of abolition, or supporters of abolition, or getting rid of slavery. Nat Turner's rebellion shows the desperation of enslaved people. In other words, their backs are against the wall. They are put in such a bad situation that they only have certain ways they can respond, and that those situations are out of desperation because of the oppression they are facing. Remember, they don't have any of the ideals. So enslaved people have three choices when in the state of enslavement. They can wait to be sold off to a new owner. In other words, put up with it until maybe their situation gets a little better. You can imagine that's in quotes, a little better. They can escape, which was a very risky proposition for a number of reasons. Or they can revolt, and that's what Nat Turner decided to do, was rebel. The pro-slavery response. So these are people in favor of slavery, whites in favor of slavery. For supporters of slavery, this revolt justifies slavery in the South. So they felt it provided yet another reason for why slavery should exist. And slavery is needed, these pro-slavery people argued, to control a dangerous population of people. So after the rebellion happens, Nat Turner's rebellion, they would say, well, this is more evidence that slavery needs to be tightened up, that slavery needs to exist because the people that are enslaved are dangerous and they need to be controlled. And actually, the response to Nat Turner's rebellion was more codes for controlling the behavior of enslaved people. This is John C. Calhoun. This is William Lloyd Garrison. John C. Calhoun would argue in favor of slavery and actually made the argument that slavery was good for the enslaved because it controlled their behavior. This is William Lloyd Garrison. He was an abolitionist and believed in ending slavery immediately. So there are three possible ways to abolish or end slavery. The first way is the immediate legal end of slavery. So passing a law and getting rid of slavery right off the bat. Well, John C. Calhoun would say that this would cause a lot of problems because then a lot of southern white planters would be out of a lot of money, and that this could cause economic ruin to the country. And there is the gradual end by law, so a gradual system of laws being passed that would end slavery and slowly compensate the owners to ease their financial losses. It was argued by the abolitionists that this wasn't going to go far enough, that it may not ever actually come true, that it might not ever be fully fulfilled. And what about the compensation that is owed to the enslaved people for what they have lost? And then there is C, which is violent rebellion or war. That is, of course, what eventually happens with the Civil War, that spreads throughout the slave states. And of course, the fear there is that it's going to lead to lots of people dying because of the fight over whether slavery should exist or not. And this is what eventually occurs with the Civil War. And that is what brought an end to slavery. So we just discussed what problems would arise with each one of these plans. This is Frederick Douglass. And he was a former enslaved person who escaped to slavery. He was a very powerful public speaker. And he was well educated. And this is important because he proved to doubters, in other words, people that were in favor of slavery or people who had stereotypes about African Americans, he proved to those doubters that African Americans were just as capable as whites. And so the abolition movement would often have him speak almost as a way of proving the capacity of African Americans to prove to those white doubters the capabilities and abilities and brilliance of African Americans. All right, thank you for listening.